Well, Coach Prime dominating college football headlines. A shocking win over TCU. And joining me now to discuss, Pat Rooney from BuffZone.com, who covers the team closely. How surprised were you, Pat, at this crazy sort of statement win that this team was able to pull off?
Yeah, I think we all were surprised. I thought it'd be a competitive game. It was hard not to take note of the talent that Deion Sanders has brought in the offseason. But, I'm like everyone else. I called a 4-8 season. My contention in my preview column was maybe that they're a year away. I thought after bringing in all the newcomers over the summer, especially, it would take a little time for this team to gel. Clearly, there was more talent on this roster. But to go out and what they did on the road, team in a national championship game last year in TCU, and not just win, but to look how crisp and efficient they did throughout that game, it was very surprising and very impressive. Incredible debut by the Buffaloes for Coach Prime.
So there was no indication really that the rapid development, I guess, required for some of these new players was there. I mean, it just kind of wasn't present. And you guys who cover the team closely were as surprised as everyone.
I think so. Like I said, we all expected improvement this year, right? I mean, compared to last year, Colorado was about as bottom of the barrel as you can get. So, we don't get to watch practice frequently. We get to, check out a few scrimmages in the preseason. So, the firsthand visual knowledge was maybe not there to see how these guys are practicing during the preseason. But yeah, I think everyone was surprised that they were able to go down and do what they did. For a lot of things, for me, it was a lot of the little things that they did well. Yeah, I thought this team would put up points this year. I didn't know that they'd necessarily put up 45 in the opener, but I thought with Shedeur Sanders and the array of receivers they have a much improved running back room as well. I think we all figured this team would score points. We thought the defense would struggle. We saw a little bit of that on Saturday as well. That's going to have to improve going forward. But to me, the biggest surprise was the lack of little mistakes. I thought with so many newcomers, especially up front on both sides of the ball, I thought this group might be good for a few false start penalties. Shedeur Sanders, maybe a poor decision here and there. 40 something attempts. I don't think there was once where we were like, wow, got away with one there. I think just about every single one of those, even on the incompletions, was a good decision that just maybe fell short or off a guy's fingertips. Very disciplined up front. We didn't really see false start penalties or silly roughing the passer calls. That's what TCU was doing. They took themselves out of a couple really key third downs with false starts. They had one right before the first interception in the end zone in the first half. That play kind of got overlooked as the game went on, and the fourth quarter was wild. But that was a huge play by Colorado safety Trevor Woods to get an early interception in the end zone. That was preceded by a false start that backed them up a little bit. TCU had a few mistakes like that throughout the game. I thought the Buffs would be good for a few of those, given the way this roster has been kind of put together on the fly over the summer. But none of that happened. They were disciplined. They played smart football. And to me, that was the most impressive part, given the prep time for this group leading into this game.
And mistake-free football is normally attributed to coaching. So, I mean, how much credit does Deion Sanders deserve?
A ton. His entire staff. I think they all deserve credit. Deion Sanders certainly, but this staff's done a great job molding these players. It's really, we've talked about it the whole offseason. This whole thing has been a little bit of a college football experiment, right? We've never seen anything quite like this, with the complete roster overhaul, and then with the idea of trying to be competitive in that first year. So, with experience, you don't know how it's going to go. Maybe we'll still see some of these mistakes going forward, but for a debut, for going into hostile territory and executing and getting the job done, I think Coach Sanders and his staff deserve a world of credit for the way that team played down there.
And you just look at some of the numbers too, Pat. I mean, this was the most watched college football game in the nation on Saturday, the second most watched game of the opening weekend, over 7 million viewers.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about Coach Prime and the way that this team was put together that is such a draw for people who are interested in this group?
Well, I think for the most part, he's an engaging personality, right? He always has been. In his press conferences, he's engaging. Even when he's a little bit testy, maybe he's engaging. He's a magnetic personality. He always has been. That hasn't changed since his playing days. So I think that's a big part of it. I think these young athletes gravitate to that when he says he's going to put them in position to succeed, not just on the football field, but in the classroom and in life and achieve their goals. He talks about all these things. And I think these young men really buy into that. They gravitate toward him. But, it's hard to be, like I said, even when he's being testy, it's hard not to be drawn in by the man's charisma. He has it coming, just kind of oozing out of him, just like his playing days. He maybe channels it in a different direction than when he was a player. But I think the players recognize that. These young men recognize that. He's an engaging personality. He's full of charisma. There's a lot of coaches that will put you on the right path and on the field and in life. But the way he goes about it and really tries to mentor these young men, I think they appreciate that. I think they recognize it. And it's hard not to be drawn in by that charisma.
And you can really see it now in today's day and age where you get these videos leaked on social media of the way that he's motivating the players before the game, the speeches that he gives. I mean, you talk about him being a charismatic character. I found myself completely motivated by just listening to him and the way that he speaks to these kids. And we've seen it time and time again. There are some NFL coaches who have not translated to the college game and vice versa because it's a distinctly different note to hit when you're mentoring young men. And it feels like he really has an understanding of what they need to hear, which is kind of fascinating. He is such a motivational sort of person and such a draw. That being said, you look at the schedule, I think you said 4-8. There are some tough games on the schedule ahead. Do people need to temper their expectations, or is the mistake-free football that you saw enough evidence already to suggest that they're going to do way better than people originally thought?
I think maybe a little of both. Not to give a wishy-washy answer. I think my 4-8 is out the window. I don't know that this team has a Pac-12 championship run in it. They might. But I think 4-8 is out the window. I always, even in my preview column, I thought they'd win these two upcoming non-conference games. They got Nebraska this week and Colorado State next week in a couple rivalry games. They start the Pac-12 with a bang. They got to go to Oregon, and they come home against USC. I think right there, obviously, we'll have kind of the measuring stick, right, about where they're going to line, kind of fare in the Pac-12. But, I think this is a bowl team at the least. I think my 4-8 is out the window. They also get Stanford at home down the road, so you got to think they like their chances in that. They've got both Arizona schools later, so we'll see how it plays out. You got to take them on. It's hard to, you want to temper expectations. But I, for one, was really impressed with how they played down there. And like I said before, to me, it's more than just the numbers. I really liked the disciplined football they played. I liked the smart football they played. Shedeur Sanders is, he's money in the pocket. He's smooth. He really carries himself like a grown man. If you see him in these press conferences, you kind of feel like you're talking to an NFL quarterback, just the way he carries himself and the way he expresses himself. So I think, Pac-12 run, we'll see. I may be tapping the brakes on that still till we see them play a little bit more. But for folks like me that had the 4-8 range, I thought Deion Sanders would get it done at some point. My preview column, like I said, the gist of it was they're probably a year away. I don't know if this is a year, but I think, to own up to it myself, I think 4-8's out the window for sure.
Hey, that's okay. And it's exciting for you to have that timetable moved up a little bit as somebody that covers the team week in and week out. You mentioned the play of Sanders, and the way that he carries himself. He does have this aura about him of having been there before. How would you rank him as a potential NFL prospect? How do you sort of view his future?
Yeah, well, watching one game, again, so I'm going to tap the brakes on that a little bit. But everyone I've talked to, this guy's he's a Sunday player, as they say. And to me, it's the decision making. I think it was 48 passes. I don't have the stats immediately in front of me here, but he threw almost 50 passes, and I don't think there was a bad decision in the bunch. He got the ball out quickly, especially early in the game. He got it out on time. There were some concerns with the offensive line coming into the season. They played pretty well. Sanders took some hits later in the game. I think they got worn down a little bit. The running game never really got going. But especially early in that game, he was getting the ball out on time. Even if there was a pass rush, they were never going to get to him with the way the ball was coming out early. Got themselves into a rhythm. and got themselves going. So, I think he's the least of the concerns with this team. That's one thing I think we all agreed on coming into this season. And I think we'll see more of that this week against Nebraska. I expect them to have a good showing against Nebraska. And yeah, I think Shedeur Sanders for sure is a legitimate NFL prospect at quarterback.
With everything that they did in the offseason, all the retooling, so much was made about that, Pat. You covered that. Deion coming in as a big personality, making a lot of promises. How important was it to have a performance like this right out of the gate to sort of set the edge and expectation for what could be possible this season? Because you get the sense that if they come out, and get completely wiped by TCU, that this could be a really demoralizing way for them to sort of kick off what was a very highly anticipated retooling.
Yeah, obviously they couldn't have started any better, right? As far as scripting a start, I mean, what more could you have asked for out of Saturday? Maybe you hope for a blowout, but I don't think that was ever in the cards on Colorado's side. But as far as momentum, yeah, absolutely. I still thought, kind of projecting out the early season, thought they'd maybe probably lose that one, come home, win these home games, and then see how they fare against those tough openers in the Pac-12. As it stands now, if they take care of business, they've got a pretty good chance of being 3-0 going into the Pac-12. They have a world momentum on their side. If they played like a team with a lot of confidence at TCU. If there were any confidence issues going into that with anyone in that rotation or on that sideline, surely those questions were answered on Saturday. This team played with a ton of confidence. I would expect that only to improve and kind of maybe momentum keep rolling with that as the weeks go forward here. But yeah, as far as scripting a start, you couldn't have done any better than that, and you have to think this team will be just kind of bursting with confidence going forward.
Yeah, and there is a danger sometimes, Pat, I think, when these young players start to believe the hype, so to speak, right? And they'd be grounded pretty quick if they didn't take their next opponent seriously. I mean, do you get any indication of the maturity level of this group or the impact that Deion Sanders has had on them to say, hey, listen, we started exactly how we wanted to start, but we have to continue to play to that level? I mean, do you anticipate any kind of downturn based on how nationally the response has been so over the top for this group?
Well, I think that answer we'll find out on Saturday, bright and early on Saturday. And they've talked about this all week. Deion Sanders had his press conference, his weekly press conference on Tuesday, and that certainly was the theme throughout it. That game's done. We got another opponent this week. It's a bunch of newcomers. They're really going about the business trying to embrace this longtime rivalry with Nebraska. It means so much to the fans, it means so much to the football alumni here. But obviously for these guys, it's all new. But, the wearing of red has been banned in the facility. They're getting ready for this game. Deion Sanders set the tone at his Tuesday press conference. I'm sure he set the tone with the team earlier than that during the week, but that was certainly the public message on Tuesday about wiping the slate clean, looking ahead to Nebraska. Shedeur Sanders and some of the receivers we got to talk to on Wednesday were kind of reiterating that theme. So we'll find out on Saturday. This team certainly enjoyed its win. The recognition is coming their way. You mentioned the off the charts TV ratings they had for that game. That they're in the AP top 25 now. I'd expect this game to be among the most watched this Saturday, if not the most watched yet again, when they take on Nebraska in their home opener. It's been sold out for months. People are chomping at the bit to watch this one out here in Boulder. So I think we'll have the answer to that question on Saturday. They've talked that talk all week, and we'll see if they make it happen on Saturday. But whatever this team has talked about so far, they've gone out and made it happen. So I think with Deion Sanders setting that tone, I don't think they'll be kind of full of big heads when they take the field against Nebraska. I don't know how well they'll execute, but I think they'll be ready to play for sure.
What a fascinating time to be covering this team for buffzone.com. Pat Rooney, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes. We so appreciate your time.
It's a lot different than last year, so I appreciate it.
I bet. Thanks a lot.